Hello and welcome to the polling station as our venerable leader Boris Johnson comes over to my beloved islands. Michelle O'Neill says Northern Ireland. A Shinner says Northern Ireland. These are truly seismic times. We've chats about the protocol. We have the two by-elections. There's been a hardening of the position of the Lib Dems in one of them. Talk of a so-called left-wing alliance between the Lib Dems and Labour. We have also some political developments across the world in the US and Australia that we'll briefly chat upon. But first of all, before we came on air today, Neil Channing said, I've just spent 11 hours and change doing such and such. What was it? We couldn't get the answer, but Neil, what was the answer? And it was a noble one.
Well, I did actually sit through the entirety of the local elections live feed that we did on Star Sports, starting at I think 11 p.m. on the night of the local elections. Yeah, I was very curious to see what people said after I went to bed. I really didn't want to go to bed because in those things, if you go to bed, people are definitely going to slag you off the second you leave. But I didn't get to the bit where I went to bed until quite a way through, and I was relieved to see you lot are so terrified of me. You didn't say anything bad. So knowing that there was a good chance I watched it back, knowing the kind of weirdo I am.
William, this is just, the man can't go any further up in my estimation anyway. I mean, I hope you had a toilet break during the 11 hours.
This is peak Channing. It's peak Channing. I thought former police was always going to be peak Channing, but no. This is for free what you get when you follow along with us. You get somebody who's so dedicated to studying everything they say that they're willing to watch a 12-hour live stream back just to be prepared. So again, thank you very much, Neil, and thank you very much to everybody who.
Well, it added one to your numbers anyway.
Indeed, every number counts. Every number.
It may make a difference come bonus time.
Exactly. So with that, an obligatory message, please do subscribe if you like what you see here. It's lots of political chat, but also lots of other betting related content too.
Paul, how are you getting on?
Very well, Johnny, very well. Lots of positions on all these markets we're going to talk about. Yeah, let's get into it.
What's happened in the sense of the last week since you were on, in terms of the positions that you're in terms of, I guess, Boris's departure? Have you gotten involved in the by-elections, and what's happening?
I do. The most imminent thing, though, is Australia, which is this weekend. I backed them originally at 1.44. I pressed up at about 1.69 when they drifted out. They did collapse into about 1.27 a couple of days ago, but they're going back on a drift again because the polls have narrowed a little bit to 1.36, but very confident that they will form the next government. Everything that I am hearing is that, and seeing in those polls, is that there is the Liberals are screwed, really. There's a sort of pincer movement against them. There's a whole load of independents targeting Liberal MPs in metropolitan areas. So I'm confident that will deliver. I think the market in that case in Australia is, what we're seeing is this massive fear of shy right-wing voters. Because the polls were a little bit wrong, about 3% wrong in 2019, there is this fear that the Liberal vote is unstated. Now, it might well be, but I think the margin is too big for them to overcome.
Might we have a market on this, William? I will talk about a few novel markets we have, including on the Northern Ireland First Minister role, but might we have an Aussie market before the election?
Yeah, highly likely. We've just been sort of doing a bit of shifting with our political markets, particularly as we rejig and we just pay attention to some of the stuff here. But yeah, I should imagine we'd get Australia up and lots of other things throughout the year, because there are quite a few international elections of major consequence. So we'll look to price up as much as we can.
Yeah, okay, we'll get to that as well. Just going to you on this, Neil, this talk of left-wing alliance, so-called, between Labour and the Lib Dems, and Lib Dems leader has spoken about it, where they're effectively, I guess, pragmatically targeting Wakefield in terms of Labour going to win that seat, but the Lib Dems are putting all their eggs into the basket of Tiverton and Honiton, and they've gone from 4 to 11, from 2 to 5 to beat the Conservatives in what has long been a Conservative heartland.
Yeah, that changed I mean, that market's been strangely quiet actually in the last 3 or 4 days. Very little matched, and not really, any big move. The move came when we saw that news about the focus groups, and when that came out, basically they'd done a focus group of people that in Tiverton and Honiton who voted Conservative in 2019 and were asking them what they thought about Boris Johnson, whether they could vote for him, what they thought about Keir Starmer, that kind of thing. And it wasn't good news for Johnson, and it wasn't very good news for Starmer either. But they essentially said that they would be, they were possibly quite interested in kicking the government by voting Lib Dem. And when that came out, basically the Lib Dems went from sort of as much as 4 to 7 really into kind of 4 to 9 territory. And they've sort of hovered around there. I mean, more broadly speaking, in terms of the whole kind of Lib Dem Labour cooperation, I mean, it sort of takes you back to the whole kind of Joe Swinson stuff. So in the time that Joe Swinson was the leader, she was looking at 22 Lib Dem target seats, whereby the majority, that they were in second place chasing a majority of 10,000 or less. 19 of those, they were chasing the Tory party. And I think, I can't remember, I think it was one SNP and one Labour. I can't remember what the other one was. I might have got the numbers slightly wrong. But she spent her whole time attacking Labour and very rarely laid into the Tories for fundamentally because that was her political viewpoint. But strategically, that seemed like a really poor move for the Lib Dems. And obviously, although Ed Davey's probably just as right-wing as her, or more right-wing in terms of, the spectrum that you can be on if you're a Lib Dem, Ed Davey was one of the writers of the Orange Book, which is kind of the thing that moved the Lib Dems to the right in the late noughties and led to the coalition and all that kind of stuff. So he's considered to be a kind of right-wing Lib Demmer. When he was in the leadership election, it was against Layla Moran. She was more of a left-wing Lib Demmer. So I sort of think that it's quite interesting that they've now decided that they have to focus their attention on kicking the Tories. It's less ideological. It's much more about strategy. And that just seems like a very correct move for the Lib Dems. And it's kind of amazing that it's taken them so long to wake up and realise that. From a Labour point of view, the reason that now they've always historically said, we're a national party. It doesn't matter if we're, I don't know, locally to me in West London, you have Labour in Richmond. Now, there was a by-election there not that long ago, in political terms, and people were saying, well, we'd quite like to go and help the Lib Dems because we want to get rid of this Tory. And the local Labour Party sort of told their members not to bother voting Labour because it might give the election to the Tories. And this was totally clamped down on from above in the Labour Party. A lot of people within Southside Labour HQ were not very happy about that message. And actually Labour ended up getting less votes in that by-election than the total membership that they have in Richmond. So that tells you what the people actually did in the sanctity of the ballot box. But like generally, Labour have always been against the idea of telling their voters to vote for anybody other than Labour or not to campaign hard for Labour, even in total lost causes like that. Now, this is not a total lost cause for Labour. Some people might turn around and say, well, it's a bit weird Labour stepping aside in this one when it's a place they've come second in before. But it's probably true that there's a ceiling to the Labour vote in Tiverton and Honiton, which has been tested several times over several elections. There's no demographic change. Even if they have a blinding election and campaign really hard, it's really going to be difficult for them to get more than 12,000 votes, and that's not going to win them the seat. So strategically, it's definitely a good thing for them to sort of back off. But it's interesting that they're suddenly doing it after so many years of saying they can't do that. A bunch of Labour members got kicked out for life in Jeremy Hunt's seat in Surrey, because they went along with an agreement with some other parties that they should all stand aside and stand as the National Health Party, just to when Jeremy Hunt was the health secretary. So, you know, it's not that long ago that those things were happening. And my cynical side will tell you that the reason for this change is because Labour can't really afford to fight a lot of these constituencies. If a general election was called tomorrow, it would suit Labour a lot to just not bother in 150 constituencies where they've got absolutely zero chance, because it would save them a fortune.
Yeah, I have to say, Paul, I find the idea of these election pacts very, very interesting, because on one level they're entirely pragmatic, but on the other level they're kind of soul destroying. What do you make of this?
Well, first of all, I think the whole issue of a Lib-Lab Pact is quite complicated, and I don't think you can really generalise across the whole country, because there are different issues in different places. You know, I don't think that it really suits them to publicly declare such a pact. I think that it is far better that you do this quietly on the ground in constituencies, and you say, we won't target this place or that place. There was a lot of times also where publicly, for Labour to publicly support the Lib Dems might hurt the Lib Dems, right? And vice versa. So you have to be careful with that. To go back, say, to the Swinton thing, and again, about how the Lib Dems message this is very tricky for them, because they, you know, notoriously fight multiple narratives in different parts of the country. And, you know, the reason they're fundamentally doing well at the moment is that they are winning Tory voters in the Blue Wall, in the South, in the home counties, where they are the main opposition. But what are they fighting on? They're fighting on not building houses. They're fighting on Tory issues. So it'll be very difficult. I think that the way they have to do this is, as I say, keep it loose. Don't attack each other. Just avoid attacking each other, basically, right? Don't say anything publicly. Now, the critical thing as well is, let's also not remember, this isn't just about Lib Dem marginals. This is about the marginals. The way that Labour benefit from this fundamentally is that if those people in the middle ground who don't support either Tory or Labour are better inclined, if there's that little switch in those seats of 2-3% away from the Lib Dems to Labour, it swings a lot of marginals. Again, going back to the new Labour years, that's what was kind of happening. You'd kind of turned hundreds of seats into a Tory or not situation, right? Without a formal pact, just because there was a general understanding that we're on the same page. So, you know, just thinking of issues in the next election, it massively suits the Lib Dems to go on a, let's have a new Brexit deal, let's rejoin the single market, let's rejoin the customs union. That's a vote winner for them. That would do good. The Tories will no doubt go to war on that, but it is not worth Labour. It's not in Labour's interest at all to start publicly endorsing that. They've just got to stay out of that, right? And then try and create a general impression out there that if we get a Lib-Lab coalition, we will get a coalition government with a more sensible, pragmatic, friendly approach towards Europe.
Just quickly on I mean, I agree with pretty much everything you said there, Paul, but weirdly. But I just quickly, I just was quickly looking at Batley and Spen, just because it was such a close by-election and a really interesting by-election. And I think this is the sort of place where you don't necessarily think of it when you think about this Lib Dem Labour working together kind of thing. Lots of people are thinking about places like Wimbledon, Kensington, you know, places in London where both parties are getting a shed load of votes. You know, I think I mentioned before where my niece and nephew are in North Devon, and Labour got kind of 11,000 and the Lib Dems lost by 1,500, getting sort of 18,000. Now, obviously, you know, a Lib-Lab kind of non-aggression pact or some kind of low-key cooperation is going to help in those ones. But where it really helps is in places like Batley and Spen. If you look at Batley and Spen in 2015, the Lib Dems got 2,400 votes and Labour won by kind of 5,000. The by-election in 2016 doesn't really count because the parties didn't all stand. the Lib Dems got 1,200 in 2017. Lib Dems got 2,400 in 2019. Well, 2,400 in 2019 was almost, enough to swing the election, really. If they just knock off 1,000 off of all those 2,400s in loads of these seats by just discouraging a decent number of their kind of tribalist loyal people who say, well, I always vote Lib Dem. I know we have zero chance here, but I'm a Lib Dem. I don't really like Labour. If they can just get some of those people to stay home or some of those people to vote Labour, they can swing dozens of seats that way. But I don't know. People are still quite tribalist. I mean, looking at that by-election in Batley and Spen, they still got 1,250 votes there. And Labour, as we know, won the seat by about 300. So, if Labour had lost that seat by 50 and, I don't know, Keir Starmer had to resign and it was considered to be a disaster for the Labour Party or whatever, I wonder what you're thinking if you're one of those Lib Dem people who are sitting there thinking, oh, God, we've got a Tory MP again. And I've gone and voted Lib Dem just because I've done that my whole life. I still wonder whether people, I think it might make some people stay at home, or it might maybe just Labour just not knocking on doors in places like Honiton and Tiverton will make a big difference. I don't know. It's tricky.
William, if the two by-elections go Lib Dems Labour, which is overwhelmingly likely at this stage, what will be the results of the by-elections since this government came into place, including some constituencies that were overwhelmingly Tory? So would that be like Labour or the Lib Dems have won all by-elections, or am I wrong?
I'm
Hartlepool.
We get Hartlepool, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they
2-1 then, would it be?
I think so. Off the top of my head, I think so.
SNP won one, didn't they?
Yes, there was also that one in Scotland, which that was expected to be an SNP retained seat. But
so at this stage, how likely is a Lib Labour coalition at the next election?
In terms of if that being the result, it's really quite likely as it stands, in the sense that after an election, hypothetically, if you had one tomorrow on the current vote boundaries, you'd probably end up with a Lib-Lab coalition just about. The numbers would be tight, but I think that's where you'd end up. And we're an 8-11 shot for a hung parliament. So it's clearly a pretty realistic idea.
I think that's a good bet. I was thinking about that this morning. Yeah. I think of all the political bets that I haven't got involved in so far that are available generally, that's the one that I think is kind of next on my shopping list to start getting involved in.
Absolutely. I mean, think about, where do those odds move? How do they get much bigger?
It's hard for them to get bigger, isn't it, really?
Because if Labour pull ahead, they will still be well odds against to get a majority.
If I slip into a coma and wake up in a year into a coma, it wouldn't be amazing if I looked on my screen, which would undoubtedly be the first thing that I did if I came out of a coma, just to check the political prices, and I saw that it was 1 to 3 and not much had happened apart from a year had gone by and we were a bit closer to an election, I wouldn't really be that surprised.
No, I think the realistic chance of it is probably 80% plus. I mean,
that makes it a great bet. That makes it the best bet we've ever had on the polling station. I mean, it's a polling station nap.
Yeah.
If we went through the Labour seats, the Labour targets, I defy anybody to tell me where Labour get 326 seats from. Right, you're having to win some unbelievable targets. Right, the only way it happens is if the SNP collapse, which they're not at the moment. Right? And then, so therefore, really, if that is the case, we're betting on Tory majority. And at the moment, the nowcasts have them getting 60, 70 seats short of majority. So once again, really, it involves a lot and not much fluctuation between the two parties.
I mean, I guess a change in Tory leader leading to an upswing in the polls for the Tories is what can change it and make it a bigger price. But as Boris Johnson clings on month after month, hung parliament looks more likely, I guess.
And even if they did, though, I mean, what price would a Tory majority be? I mean, you think of the last election. Even when when it was crystal clear from the polls that a Tory majority was coming.
It traded 8 to 13 on the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it was clear in the polls, but it was 8 to 13, 3 o'clock in the afternoon on polling day in 2019 election.
It's interesting, William. So Boris has come to Northern Ireland. He actually wrote a piece in the Belfast Telegraph, and he softened his tone markedly on the protocol. So he's obviously in a position now where he's kind of backtracking a bit on obviously a deal that he actually agreed himself, and he's saying we're going to not scrap the protocol, we're going to renegotiate it. What have you made of all this?
Yeah, well, Johnson was in Belfast yesterday, and in fact, it's continuing today because Liz Truss there'll be cabinet, there'll be political cabinet. Liz Truss is there now, I believe, and there'll be a statement to MPs. There was a clear sort of attempt at diplomatic mode from the government yesterday, to give them their due credit, which I don't think they have too much of on this issue, because this was something which was pointed out. It was pointed out so much it left experts blue in the face at the time. But when we signed the protocol, we knew very much what we were doing. There is no hoodwinking here. We signed a trading agreement, the primary issue which was to avoid a hard border returning to the island of Ireland. And that's as the protocols worked. And the frustrations about it seems to me, are primarily just frustrations about Brexit-based trading and Brexit-based realities, which unfortunately make things more expensive. It makes business a bit more costly because you're having extra checks because you're not in the single market. Now, in terms of the politics of this, Johnson yesterday, he saw all 5 major party leaders. I don't think he impressed any of them particularly. It's a tough gig, to be fair, because it's a land of contradictions. He is between a rock and a hard place. His own rock, admittedly, that he signed, but still. And I got the feeling in it that, as much as I'd love for it not to be the case, I don't really see how Stormont sort of gets up and running.
Okay. Well, I got to stop you there. Because Michelle O'Neill is clearly on the 15 to 8. Yes. Will a new First Minister of the Northern Ireland Assembly be appointed before July the 1st? Michelle O'Neill in Parliament using the term Northern Ireland is incredibly seismic. I don't think this has gotten nearly enough publicity, and I'll give out about climate change not being reported on. But in Northern Irish terms, this is absolutely massive. This is an acknowledgement of the existence of the state, which hitherto has not been done by a Sinn Féin person at all in public. This is absolutely massive, and it follows on from their pre-election kind of not focusing on a border poll and focusing on bread and butter issues, which catapulted them to a historic victory. This is amazing. But so anyway, to the Star Sports leading the way here, will there be a First Minister of the Northern Ireland Assembly by appointment before July the 1st? No 2 to 5, yes 15 to 8. I think 15 to 8 is value there. I think the DUP are just playing for time here. They're obviously messing about with the protocol. They're alienating people more and more and more by not sitting in Stormont, because that's what they're actually paid to do. That is what they're paid to do. This election was about people wanting bread and butter issues solved, not this rubbish about the protocol, which most parties support anyway. 15 to 8. So how long did the DUP hold out with this nonsense? I think that's value, William.
Well, again, you be the expert on this. I personally was of the opinion that I saw it being very hard to sort of see either side. Well, I don't want to both sides this fight, because it's not really a both sides issue. The protocol works and people in Northern Ireland by and large support it, right? But in terms of like these grandstanding issues, I see it being really difficult for the DUP to come down sort of off that pedestal, which is why
the DUP is irrelevant. Like the DUP has nothing to do with the negotiations between the EU and the British government. They are entirely sidelined, and all they're doing here is trying to protect their base within unionism. So effectively, there are mild issues with the protocol, which have really nothing to do with the overall scheme of things in Northern Ireland. So the DUP are just holding on until inevitably they'll climb down and say, we got what we wanted, which would be an entirely incidental change to the protocol. It's just how long Boris can kind of hold on to the same narrative that he's going to try to claim a victory from this, even though he negotiated this thing in the first place.
I think Boris will be happy to sort of change and do his climb down fairly rapidly. That's been the whole story really of his premiership. It's about the others basically. I mean, again, you've got a much more informed perspective from it on it than I do. But from what I've seen, namely over the last month, I didn't have terribly high hopes for something being done. But again, I probably might be a bit more naturally pessimistic. I'm going in it from outside, you're coming in it from inside.
I rarely say anything when we're talking about Ireland because I think it's so messy and I feel so ignorant compared, especially with you living there, Johnny, and living through it and whatever. But just explain to me the mechanics of it. So, it seems to me that DUP, they've kind of backed themselves into a corner. There's nothing they can do. They're just going to have to be stubborn and stick it out and not change their position. The EU seem to be not changing their position. So does Boris Johnson just have to climb down and for Stormont to start sitting? And if Stormont doesn't start sitting, how long is it? What's the rules on when do we need another election if we don't get a parliament sitting?
Yeah, well, the government's been brought down twice in recent years. One was over the incredibly farcical heat for the renewable ash scheme, which was incredible, and obviously was again brought down recently over the protocol. But there's no chance of another election because the DUP's vote was so small in this, they can't hold everyone to ransom. Now they're obviously not agreeing to go in. The Good Friday Agreement has this bizarre kind of binary position where you have to say you're nationalist, unionist, or other, and because of the mechanics of it, there kind of have to be a nationalist unionist duo in Parliament, and this just happens to be the first time that nationalists got the first ministry role. The first ministry role and the joint first minister, it's actually, there's no real difference between the two, so it is actually a parity. But the EU, when they negotiated the protocol with Boris kind of rushed it through because he wanted to basically get elected, and he was done with that. Just rush it through and deal with it later. There were nuances in terms of little agreements, so it's not like the EU is in a position to actually agree some minor changes, but effectively it'll be minor changes. So the DUP is completely in a corner here. It's been completely sidelined by the UK government, lied to by Boris, who made them false promises. The DUP is in an incredibly precarious position in terms of.
I'm presuming that if there was another election tomorrow, the DUP would do worse. They did pretty badly anyway, but they'd do worse.
They would,
and,
absolutely.
And therefore, if there's no threat of another election, there's no incentive for the DUP to change their position. They might as well just dig in.
They'll dig in and they'll eventually just agree to whatever was agreed above their heads, and then they'll get into government. If the DUP doesn't get into government, it needs to realize that as a party, the only way it can actually function is by becoming the main party in a pragmatic unionism. And bear in mind, the nationalist vote in this election was more or less the same as the nationalist vote in Northern Ireland at the foundation of the state. So the union is actually secure in terms of polling, and the DUP just needs to realize that, as opposed to antagonizing people on both sides.
You used an interesting word there, Johnny, though, pragmatic.
Yeah, well, there we go.
When have they ever been?
Like,
this is the point. The pragmatic wing of unionism was the Ulster Unionist Party.
Yeah.
Right? And they've been wiped out. This is what I would be surprised if they were to come round to some kind of pragmatic position, because I just wonder what their future as a party would be at all. They have built this thing over many, many decades, which is basically a sort of populist, far-right, ultra-nationalist, symbolic movement. And I just wonder how many of their representatives and how many of their donors, etc., would accept that. The other thing you've got as well is we're talking about Boris. Yeah, now Boris Johnson would definitely do some kind of deal, because Boris Johnson will do whatever suits Boris Johnson, right? We know that. But there's a hell of a lot of hardliners in the Tory party who enjoy and are loving this a new war with the EU, a new faction. And I don't think this is going to end anytime soon. I just think it suits all of those.
I definitely agree with that. I was watching Boris Johnson on the news yesterday, and I was thinking, actually, this is probably playing quite well with the Tory base. It's a lot of, the plucky United Kingdom fighting against the EU bureaucrats. And actually, if the Tories can spin that out for a bit, that might work quite well for them.
Yeah, I think there's an element of that, but I think it'll completely wreck his head after a while as well. And like the UK's position in terms of global politics, this doesn't shine well on Boris at all because he negotiated this deal. So he's basically like, he's just throwing his toys out of the pram for political reasons here. And I'm not sure how long it's going to go on. The EU is exacerbated at this stage. The Irish government is exacerbated. But for like the grim reality of the Northern Ireland election was like, the climate never came into it. The only green thing was the green and orange issue. And it's sad that the unionism and the DUP is worried about rubbish like the protocol when we've far bigger issues. But I'd agree with Paul. I think the DUP is kind of screwed now because I don't really think there's so many lunatics in that party. I don't think they can actually roll back and become modern and kind of middle ground unionism. Because that's actually been taken by Alliance, who are kind of agnostic on the constitutional question. And unionism at one level can be quite happy where the polls are in terms of United Ireland, but at the other level, it's kind of in crisis. I don't really know how long this is going to go on with the protocol, but like there's a lot of fatigue, I think, at this stage because it's ultimately over small enough matters.
Just, I don't know whether you want to go much further into Northern Ireland or wait for another week, but why have the SDLP completely fallen off the map?
Yeah, I find that actually quite tough because, okay, so what happened was Sinn Féin and the DUP were obviously the extremes. And over the course of the two parties who effectively helped bring about the Good Friday Agreement, the UUP and the SDLP, have been obliterated since. So strangely enough, the Good Friday Agreement has pushed voters to the extremes because it suited a bit like electoral pacts. It just suits to vote for the one that's going to get in. So when it becomes a binary choice of vote for the Unionist Party that's going to get in or vote for the Nationalist Party that's going to get in, you end up voting for the other. Now, the SDLP haven't done incredibly badly. They're trying to reform, and the UUP didn't poll ridiculously badly, but it's very, very hard when it comes to an election. And the closer it gets an election, the DUP will basically scare people into voting for them. On the other side, Sinn Féin, extremely efficient electoral machine. They made changes in Derry where they basically sacked two of their MLAs, brought two young people in, and really restored the dominance in Foyle. Because the SDLP have been performing reasonably well, but it's very, very hard for the middle ground if you're one or the other and you're not Alliance, I think, to survive. I'm not giving up on the SDLP. I think they still have a future because for me, once Sinn Féin come into power in the south, they'll realise that they can talk as much as they want about issues as backbenchers and in opposition, but I'm not sure about their capability for government at all.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean that's an incredibly polarised country anyway, but that trend, that's an international trend. That's how politics in the 21st century works. Not just polarisation, but it's that clear brand, we're on your side, right? It's so easy to lock people down into those things. I think you're right. I mean, as long as Sinn Féin are an opposition party, right, then it's easy for them. It's easy. The minute they are actually confronted with power, then that might change.
Yeah, well, Paul, like they basically what Sinn Féin spouts in the south about, carbon tax, looking after the lower classes, all that stuff. When Sinn Féin's in power in the north, they basically are very, very centrist, and they're no different really to anyone else. And for me, this was an incredibly grim election because nobody got in at all from the Greens, to the best of my knowledge. There wasn't a single Green vote, and it was totally ignored in the election, which is grim. We better move on though, because Northern Ireland will just kill us all like climate change. Paul, you wanted to talk about the US?
Yeah, scary, very scary, with enormous international implications. Just seen another Nazi mass murder, which of course will be dismissed as another lone wolf attack or something, but yet another one, right? Using the same great replacement conspiracy theory that Tucker Carlson is so keen to push.
Filmed in real time, I believe, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Just what is this now? 10 maybe in the last 10 years since. It's an absolute cancer spreading across the Western world, but it's particularly bad there in America where they've got such easy gun access. Now, you've also got a lot of interesting primaries going on tonight, next week, and the weeks ahead for the midterms in November. And what we are seeing is, the further radicalisation of the Republican Party. So the big one would be in Pennsylvania, where you have the almost certain to be the Republican candidate for governor is a guy called Doug Mastriano, endorsed by Trump, and he's already committed to the fact that Pennsylvania state electors would not be bound by having to elect the winner of the election. So what we really are, and Pennsylvania is of course the key state in any American election. So really this seems like it seems almost inevitable now that in 2.5 years, unless the Republicans win, in which case of course they will appoint their own president. But it does seem that there is absolutely no way of stopping them, because if the Democrats win the election again, they're not going to certify the results. The Republicans are not going to certify the results. We are going to have another violent standoff. And, I can't help but think that it is only a matter of time before America breaks up.
Wow.
Oof. I mean, to be fair,
what a betting heat that will be.
Nap.
The traders going to have so much work cut out. So much work cut out for them.
Can I quickly say something about Hartlepool before we're done?
I want to jump in with something after, so do go on.
Okay. I know it's only because we talked about the by-election. We didn't really talk about Hartlepool. Sorry, I said Hartlepool twice. I meant to say Wakefield, of course. So the Wakefield by-election, obviously, the Tory MP is, been found guilty of whatever sexual misconduct. I can't remember exactly the crime, but anyway, whatever. We won't call him anything that he's not legally called. But anyway, the Labour, it looked like an obvious win for Labour. They were 10-1 on. Labour have attempted to shoot themselves in the foot a little bit this week because of the selection of their candidate. So just quickly, the way you select a candidate, if you want to be a Labour candidate in a by-election or a general election, you basically apply with a CV in the same way as you would for any other job. And then the area party take a look at all those CVs and draw up a list, which is comically called the long list and often doesn't have very many names on it. And then that list is submitted to the members locally and they vote on the one that they like the most. Well, in times when Labour's been a Democratic Party, the members have been presented with quite a long list, and it's really been left to the members to make up their mind. And in other times, different times under different leaders, the lists have been stitched up by the local area office. And Keir Starmer made one of his pledges when he got elected that wouldn't happen anymore, and that the selection process would be free and open, and members would get to choose from a candidate they liked. Anyway, he's given them a long list of 2 candidates, neither of whom live in Wakefield. He rejected the deputy leader of Wakefield Council, who is hugely popular among the locals, and the entire executive of the Wakefield Labour Party quit in protest over this and said that the whole process was undemocratic and they weren't very happy about it. I think there's about 400 members of the Wakefield Labour Party, and 132, which is a decent turnout, turned up and voted for the least preferred candidate of the 2. They picked the guy who used to work for the previous Labour MP there, Mary Cray. He was her political assistant, over the one that Keir Starmer wanted. So they sort of protested a little bit that way, but none of them are very happy. Lots of people saying they're not going to campaign now, they're not going to knock on doors, they're fed up with it. People walking out, people quitting the party. And then yesterday, we hear everyone's old mate, George Galloway, saying that he might consider standing. So that's 2 things that have happened that have driven the price a little bit. And the price on the Tories winning the seat has gone from 8-1 down to 5-1 on the back of those things. I still don't really think they'll win the seat, but it's certainly breathed a bit of betting life into something that looked a bit dead.
I think it's a really interesting race. I think it could get really interesting. I don't necessarily even think we should think of it as a 2-horse race. You've got Galloway, who did, remarkably well. I mean, again, that's one of the most understated political stories of recent elections, how he got 22% in Batley and Spen. And that included a lot of Tory voters, right? You've also got the Yorkshire Party, running, and I just think, I think Labour obviously are favourites, right? But I could see this turning into some kind of 3-4 way contest where 35% wins.
I mean, that'd be fascinating. I agree with what you said, both of you, on that. And what had looked, dare I say it, like, because I know Starmer told the PLP yesterday that they were going to be in for the fight of their lives and that he wanted everybody down there on the ground, which, to be fair, they should be hitting the ground hard, but I didn't think it was going to be. But there is the potential now for things to get lively, and hopefully not lively in the way that Batley and Sven got lively, because that was quite unedifying towards the end, but it is worth keeping an eye on that. Just a bit of breaking news to end, picking up very strong vibes that they will go, as Paul said, you alluded to last week, Chris Heaton Harris is apparently moving a writ to have both by-elections on the same night. So 23rd June, I believe, would be the provisional date, both for Tiverton and for Wakefield. So that would be quite a Thursday. And we are going to look into our odds, and we'll let you know of any changes over the next week. But
another live stream.
11 and a half hours.
11 and a half
I
hours.
can't wait.
11 and a half hours. Yeah, exactly. And we'll have like not one but two by-elections, and I might even be down there.
It's the 11-hour double by-election special, which starts from.
Now, all I've got to do is to decide where to go, which is going to be interesting.
I think you've got to go to Wakefield, Will.
I'll tell you what, I'll be settling in for a lovely evening in front of the telly. I might even get myself a korma.
Doesn't Paul look great? He's so central in that image. He just looks like someone who's speaking like from the heavens or something, right down to me as some sort of lordly leader.
It's incredible. I love this. Yeah. I'm a huge fan of the four-way vision, because we're getting very Brady Bunch about it now.
We really are. And from the Brady Bunch, that was the polling station this week. I hope you enjoyed our tangential chats about Northern Ireland, the US, Australia, the Green Party, and the Corma Police. And we'll be back next week.